do the right thing by the horse. No ribbon is worth, well, maybe there is a ribbon worth it, but I haven't found one yet. No ribbon is worth your horse. I mean, there's just not. The end of the day, the things that keep me up at night are several, but if a horse is compromised and it was, I mean, it happens. We're in competition. We're in horses. Horses get hurt. They're all going to die before we do, that sort of thing. They're going to go lame. But if you feel your knowledge and know enough to avoid those things, then you have to commit yourself to it. And I think knowledge is the key to all of it. And it's not utilized enough in our sport. I think people are so fascinated by the ribbon that they think that means something. Well, I mean, I got lots of ribbons that don't do much for me, but I'll tell you what, that horse, when I go out there and I get on it to ride it at home or at a show, and it gives me its heart, I mean, it's just so worth it then.
Welcome to the Practical Horseman podcast, featuring conversations with respected riders, industry leaders, and horse care experts. The show is co-hosted by Practical Horseman editors, and our goal is to inform, educate, and inspire. I'm Julia Murphy, and this week's episode is with trainer, clinician, and international 5-star eventer Kyle Carter. Carter grew up on a farm outside of Calgary, Alberta, in Canada, where his lifelong dedication and love of horses began. Originally focused on jumpers, Carter saw success in his young years under the tutelage of Albert Cly. Later in life, Carter made the move to eventing and worked his way to become a World Equestrian Games silver medalist, an Olympian, and a Pan American Games athlete. Present day, Carter continues to focus on competing at the highest levels of eventing, while he and his wife, Jennifer, own and run 5 Ring Stable, a successful 5-star eventing barn in Citra, Florida. Before we dive into the podcast with Kyle, I'd like to thank the sponsor of this week's episode, Purina, and share their message. Your horse has unique feed needs, and Purina has you covered. From breeding and growing to senior horses, from performance horses to easy keepers and everything in between, Purina has an extensive portfolio of research-backed options for your horse. There's no shortcut for quality nutrition. Cheaper isn't cheaper if it doesn't work. Put their research to the test. Find optimal nutrition at any level at your local Purina retailer or visit purinamills.com to learn more. Now enjoy the episode with Kyle.
Okay, so just to get started here, thanks again for hopping on to chat with me. And to get to know you a little better, just very simple question. How did you get interested in horses and riding to begin with?
I grew up on a farm with my parents out in outside of Calgary. We had like 450 acres. They had cattle. They bred some race horses. My dad was a vet, and they were just sort of into it. But what sort of pulled me into it was my brother loved horses, and whenever they'd lead the broodmares across the farm in front of the house and stuff, he would, make them put him up on them, and then he would eat out of the feed bins with them and stuff. Like, he was sort of obsessed with it, and it was sort of inevitable that we were both going to ride because my parents were into it. And so we had, like a pony right off the bat. I'm younger than my brother, so I was on the pony that he had originally. And, it was a pretty ideal existence because we basically were kicked out of the house every morning and went and did any number of things on this farm, which involved, you name it. My brother burned down a haystack. We would go end up at our neighbor's place and with our horses and forget them there and things like it. Just
troublemakers.
We lived in a full country, and we would just travel. The horses were what we used for transportation and for as kids until we were old enough to get motorbikes. So,
right.
So it was always there. We had a hunt at our farm every year, and it was really cool. Calgary still has this. Every fall, every weekend they have a hunt. There's no hounds. They just go to cross-country sites, and I think they still do the full cross-country stuff. And you just go, and there's one guy who sort of knows where they're going, and you follow him around in a giant group at different speeds. And I mean, you jump everything up to intermediate fences is how we did it. It was awesome.
Yeah.
It was just like, it was so much fun.
Yeah, I've done actually a couple hunts myself. Again, not with hounds, but you just go out with that big group of people and you gallop across the fields and do jumps and stuff. It's such a great experience.
Yeah, and then it was great for the kids. It was great because my friends, not all of them, but a lot of them rode, and so we just would all end up somewhere on Sunday. We'd all do that. Then we would all play and hang out, and my parents would hang out with all the adults. And then my parents don't drink, but most of the people did. And what they would do
Yeah.
is they would take a truck with the bar cart, and they'd locate, they'd go to 4 or 5 places around this. They'd be out for 2 hours, but you'd end up at this place where they'd have food and drink, and then you go on to the next one. And it sounds very posh, but it was totally it was about as redneck as you could get in Alberta.
That sounds so fun.
It was.
And when did you start getting more serious about your riding? And maybe when you started competing and such.
Yeah, I mean, I probably started competing when I was I don't know, we went to gymkhanas and all sorts of things. And again, it wasn't like Kyle was begging to go to these things. My brother had wanted to ride, and so my parents just kind of, organized that we went to these pony club, gymkhanas, local jumper shows, complete, just really low key, not the real high end stuff. And it was great because you're making your mistakes, you're just having fun and really getting natural feel with it all. And I probably started, honestly, when I was probably 5 to 9, I was out competing, and my aunt evented as well. And so
Okay.
I know when I was 9, I had a really great jumping horse, and I was doing training level with him at 9 years old. And I only know that because I won a cup at, the Western Canadian Championships or something. And so it's every now and then I see the cup and it's just a mug, and I'm like, I can't believe I was going, it's sort of hard to kind of think of it nowadays that way, that you would be doing that. But, if you were on the right horse, you just kind of figured it out. So, and then, but obviously that wasn't terribly serious. We were doing lots of different things. And then my brother and I started doing triathlon and modern pentathlon. And alongside that, we kept riding. And the riding, just for me, it just was, I really enjoyed it. So I started, the further I went, the more I did, the higher level stuff that I ended up kind of doing. It was mostly because my dad saw the trajectory, and so he would just organize it. So he would, it'd be like, I said I wanted to go to Young Riders, so he just looked at what needed to happen to do that. He actually we ended up organizing an event at the intermediate level to get qualified. I mean, it's all due to my father's ability to not wait for me to figure it out, because we'd still be waiting for anything to happen. I enjoyed immensely what I was doing in riding the horses, but he sort of was far more better at picking a path, and saying, well, if that's your goal,
right,
what are we doing? So what really changed it was, for me, was I went and I started riding with a lady named Claudia Kojakar, who's still out coaching, but now jumpers were very big in the area. It's in Calgary, Alberta. We were right down the road from Spruce Meadows, and the best trainers were jumpers. So started working with Claudia. She has coached a couple people to the Pan Am Games in show jumping, and I rode with her for about probably 3 or 4 years, and then transitioned into, it was hard for her. She ran a very high-end show barn, and I was like barnyard scruffy, I had brown boots, I wore rubber boots. I was just like and I didn't care because I really wasn't aware of it. I'm far more self-conscious now than I was back then with that stuff, but I was just, I just wanted to get on the horses. And then I spent a couple of months riding at Spruce Meadows with Albert Cly, who was their riding master. And at that point decided that I wanted to ride there with him, because he just, like, when he talked to me, he just made sense. It was one of those things. And it was actually a really big epiphany for me in my coaching, where you start to understand that your job is to identify how the person learns and work on that. But at the same time, not every coach is for everyone. And so you kind of need to migrate to where the best situation is for you to achieve your goals. And it was for me. Albert taught me horsemanship. He taught me he was a German rider, and he taught me so much on the flat and understanding the prioritizing the horse's well-being over everything else. So it was just, I mean, it was without making me aware of it. He just did it. It was great. So with that, I started to get way more competitive in the jumpers. And I had a couple of horses that were not jumping as well as they could, because that's a pretty big environment there at Spruce Meadows.
Oh,
and,
yeah.
And 4 faults isn't going to get you, it's not going to get you anything.
Yeah.
So the horses that were not quite up to the show jumping, although they were good jumpers, like they could jump big fences, I just started to event them because I'd done that. And so I took the first one. I'd already evented when I was younger, but I had gotten away from it. And I started to, I just took the jumpers that weren't working terribly well on the jumper ring and started eventing them. And then on the weekends, I would do jumpers. I would do jumpers all week, and then I would go to an event on the weekend with the other horses. And, I was really fortunate. I probably had like 20 some horses through my life before I was 18 years old.
Wow.
Because my dad also was a master at picking up other people's discards and difficult things and bringing them home, because he'd see some, like some glimmer in them, and he would just assume that the job was but he was like, well, figure it out. It's got potential, work on it. And I have to say, it really served me well, because in my barn now, and it's been this way from day one, there's not a single horse there's no stamp. You walk in there and it's like, well, that's one type, and there's a totally different type, and their temperaments are completely different and all of that. And so I've been really lucky to, have a huge variety of options when I ride horses. And that's due to that initial part with him. That really started me down the idea of how much fun it's sort of stupid, but all I want to do is I just wanted to have fun riding horses. I still am a little bit that way, but there's a lot more responsibilities now. Yeah. But I always had a lot of horses to ride, and I was just happy to, if someone shoved something underneath me, I was like, this is awesome. I get to ride this one too. And, it was great. And then what really transitioned me into more of a professional end was at the end of my high school years and my junior jumper years. I'd done some really big classes that last year as a jumper. But I recognized that by that point, we'd gone through a major financial reshuffle in my family, and my dad had gone bankrupt. And so I was very much shoestring budget and making do with other people's discards. But I had a really good mare in my barn that other people had, and she was known on the circuit as Scary Mary, because she would bounce one strides and do ones and twos.
Oh gosh.
Yeah, and I'm not talking like at the local show. They're doing it at Spruce Meadows, and this thing would fly around. They ran her in something called the nerve line, which is a particularly uncomfortable looking device that actually twitches them while you're riding them.
Oh gosh, I never heard of that before.
It was really it was, the worst part was she was a thoroughbred that come off the track. They bred her, and she was jumping out of round pens that were like 6 feet high. And so they were like, well, this might make a jumper. And they sent it to someone, and they did no training with it. They just took it and jumped it. And so when it came to me, she was already she was pretty notorious, and she was, I think, 14 or 15 at that time. But my trainer, again, Albert, he was like, nope. Every day we did an hour of dressage before we were able to jump. And he really like made me put basics on her, and she just
Yeah.
became a complete reformed character. And because of that, I was able to, jump at a really high level. The last year of the Masters, I qualified for what was the Du Maurier then, and now it's the CN International. So like it was $1 million class. I didn't go into it because my coach was like, you're qualified. She can jump that height, but you're not good enough to run around a whole course of that. And he was completely right. But I remember that, like, just being able to get to that point after starting with her in the beginning of the year, because I only had her that year. It was a pretty big shift for me, and it made me aware of how much I wanted to do this, but it also made me aware of one key thing, and that was that without the backing, the show jumping was not a route that I was going to be successful at, because if I had a good one, I was going to have to sell it. And you can't, understanding, you can't make a show jumper. It's got to be careful enough. You can make them better. You can help them jump bigger, but you can't make them jump a big fence if they don't have that in them. And so that immediately restricts them. Where certainly at that point, you could make an event horse. And I'd made a few of them up to intermediate. And I was like, well, this is obviously my option is to do the best thing for my career would be to follow the eventing path. Because I had a couple offers for some jumper barns to work in and stuff. But one was in New Zealand and one was in California. And then not a job offer, a working student position opened up in England. And I was like, I'm going to learn more about eventing in England than I'm going to learn about show jumping in New Zealand or California, show jumping in California. And so I moved over there for a year. And that, again, it was my dad. He was like, I remember him coming home. I remember so vividly. I was working on maintenance at Spruce Meadows because I was that good of rider that they were willing to make me a maintenance worker. And he came home and he was like, what do you want to ride horses? Here's this, these are the options. And there were 3 jobs laid out. The one was the working student in England. I was like, yeah, I think that's probably the smartest move. It's sort of amazing I made a smart move actually at that point, because I'm clueless, and certainly then I was really clueless. And he came home literally the next day with a plane ticket, and I loaded up I'd had 3 horses going at that point. One I rode for some people, very wealthy people, and it was my first experience in the professional end of it, where I came in, I'd taken this horse that had been difficult, turned him around and made him into a really nice animal. And I walked in the barn one day and someone else was riding him, trying him. And they were like, yeah, well, they said they were going to keep him for me. And they're like, well, we weren't really going to keep him. And they sold him. And then my intermediate horse that I was getting ready to go advanced on had an injury that just kind of was starting to flare up, and I didn't want to push on him and have him get hurt. So I set him aside. And the other one was just a thoroughbred that was going prelim that wasn't quite ready to go on and shine. I needed that opportunity to leave. So I didn't take a horse with me. I just went over and I worked in England, in their barn, rode their horses, mucked their stalls, cleaned the cobblestones, you name it, did all of it.
Yeah.
But I can't tell you, there was nothing that would have made me a better professional than that, because I learned the whole, like, I can do anything on a farm. The question would be whether he braids well enough to actually have anybody want to look at it, not vomit. But everything else I can put my hand to and do. And you don't get that just getting a lesson. So I was really fortunate in that I was able to go and do that and be a working student. And my dad and my parents were willing to sort of be like, well, all right, off you go out of the house and, halfway across the world, and as though it was no big deal,
Yeah. That's amazing how supportive your parents and your father were. And that actually kind of leads into my next question about who some of your mentors have been over the years and who's influenced your riding. And, you spoke about your coach too. So if you want to speak about either of them some more, or if you have some other people that you'd like to mention, just people who have really had a big hand in your career over the years.
Yeah, well, so it's interesting because I think I've certainly followed a different path than what we do with our students now. But like in the early stages, the first person that spoke to me where I was like, where the wiring started to actually get put into my brain and I understood what the heck was going on. Up until then, I'd been, a bit seat of the pants. And then when I'd go into a formal lesson, they would start talking and I would just be like, I have no idea what's going on here. Because everything had been sort of natural and they weren't explaining it of this is why you're doing it. It was explained of, the process as they were climbing up. And it wasn't like it was okay. It worked all right, but it didn't make me understand it the way that Albert did. Albert Cly absolutely changed and I was fortunate because he was such a horseman. So when it changed my perspective to horsemanship, it made me 100 times better than I'd been before. Maybe not more competitive, but more where I was going to be successful long term. And I never, I don't think he ever knew how much that meant to me because, look, it wasn't back when people posted on Facebook and all that. And I'm not like going to go chase people down, be like, oh my God, you're the best. I love you. You're wonderful. But he absolutely changed my life. And he died a few years ago. And I remember when he died, I was like, I'd seen him and I talked to him and stuff, but I don't think expressed to him enough how much he influenced me. And not, again, like being my cheerleader, just being pragmatic, telling me the stuff that was important. He was hard when he needed to be, hard. He was kind when he needed to be kind. I wouldn't say he was ever fluffy, but he was funny sometimes and things. But he absolutely changed the direction of my riding because of what was important to him. And I will say, if I had ridden with a different coach who was more of a dismissive of the horsemanship and stuff, I probably would have thought that was okay too, because that's what would have influenced me. But I always did love the horses, and I loved that's how that came to me. So he certainly was that first person that kind of made me open my eyes to what I wanted out of it. Like even to the point when he told me not to, like it was $100 nomination fee to do that the Des Mauriers, and you got like $1,000 to finish. And my brother was like, I've got $100. I will pay that. You go in there. He wasn't riding he'd quit riding at that point, but he was like, let's get $1,000, because that was a lot of money to us. Like it was not.
Oh yeah.
I was working for $10 an hour cleaning out goat barns and stables in the area and stuff. Like on a weekend, I would go and drive down the road, not because I'm saying, but because I wanted the cash. I needed the money. But so I didn't, but when he said, you can go and I'll walk and we'll do everything we can, but it's not the right thing. Like I really respect him enough and I wanted to do it, but you know what? He was right. I would have been in there over my head. And I see that a lot in coaching, and I see that a lot in riding, where people aren't aware of it because everything's gone well, so they just assume it's going to continue to go well. And but I respect him enough not even to just like, I walked the course and I was like, you know what, he's right. This is not. I think I got 5 fences in. I was like, he's right, but I wouldn't.
It's good to have a coach that manages expectations.
Yeah. Well, and you think about it, and like coaching is such a huge part of my life now that I see it all the time. Like you can predict how students are going to fail by who the coaches they're working with. I mean, when the best thing your coach can do for you is make you feel good when things are going wrong, that's their biggest claim to fame, then they're not doing their job, in my opinion. I mean, if that's what you need, then great, but you don't get success out of that. So,
right.
So that was the first one. And then when I went to England, I worked for Leslie Law. And at the time, Leslie's not that much older than me. I think he was 24 at the time and I was 18. I'd obviously I'd been to Young Riders at that point. So I'd done 3 stars. I'd done like 3 or 4 3-stars actually. And I went into that barn. And so his knowledge wouldn't have been the greatest at that point because he was only 24. But I will tell you what, I worked with him and his brother. I worked for them, and I didn't get a lesson after the first 6 weeks I was there. That was it. That was the last lesson I got, was 6 weeks in. But they would let me ride because I was somewhat competent. I'd get to ride like 4 or 5 horses in the ring, and we'd ride around, and they'd be like, well, hey, why don't you try this? Or have you thought maybe do this? Like, it was really a great experience for me because it was like it wasn't the formal lesson situation, which I think so much more was learned by me for that.
Right.
And then the biggest part was they had that drive, enthusiasm, work ethic. Like I can tell you from day one, you just knew that there was going to be success for them because they were good riders, but more than that, they wanted it. And so being around that made me more aware of, how you proceed down the road if you're going to be successful. So that year was hugely instrumental in forming the next part of it. One of it being is it was a sales barn that we were working in, and by working in that sales barn, it allowed me to actually, when I came back to Canada, to become a professional making money because I brought on horses and sold them, and I knew exactly what I was looking for. I knew how to produce them, had a better idea what I was how to train and stuff. But as someone, so I started my business with $10,000. That was what I got from selling the horses the horses I had. I started my business with $10,000 and was able to build to what we have here and the career I've got because of the year working for them, learning the actual ropes. But then when I came back and I was working over here, I didn't have very much money. So all the stuff I did was producing and riding and buying and selling, breaking people's horses, teaching lessons and everything to try to earn an income. But I couldn't really afford a lot of mentorship. And I will say, I wish I'd stayed in a working student program for like 4 or 5 years, because I would have saved myself a lot of heartache and mistakes. And it also, I realize now, as hard as the work was as a working student, it was easier than being a professional because it wasn't on me. It was just work. It wasn't like I had the stress of paying the bills and all that stuff. But then what happened is after, 15 years of working with all sorts of different people, when I'd made a team already, but when David O'Connor became the Canadian, the coach for the Canadian team.
Yep.
David, after the very first trip I took with him we went to Rio and he coached down there, and I'd worked with him before that for about a year. And after that trip, I came home and I was like, wherever David goes as a coach and I'm riding, I believe everything he's going to tell me. Like, he understood it at the same way that I wanted to understand it, which is the horse is first. And the competition might not be first, but you still have to work. You got to go for that competition. He was honest. He was thorough. And he made a really big difference for me at that point, because, again, he kind of opened up what had become a very closed view in my riding, which was I was available to ride anything, and I would ride anything, and I would ride it hard and work hard. If it didn't matter if it had no desire to do it, I was going to fill it with desire. And David was very good at making me start to understand how, if you're really doing this well, you're riding horses that you're not having to make that happen on. You can't ride those and have a long, I'd already done it for 15 to 18 years, but you can't have a lifetime of a career like that, because A, you're going to get hurt, and B, you're losing all of the work that you're doing. Those horses aren't always going to compete that well. So you need to have horses that cooperate with you. And so he was really good for me because he made me sort of tone down and ride more correctly,
Right. And so now we've talked about some of your mentors, some people who have been your mentors and influential people who have been a part of your career. What about some influential horses that you've had throughout your career?
Oh my God, there's so many. And it's funny, last night my daughter was down with a kid that I'm helping for the Young Riders this year in Tryon, and she sent me a text with that girl's FEI page and my FEI page, and she was like, have you only done 89 FEI events, but it's obviously on it's on a time roll.
Mm-hmm.
And I was like, well, no, but I've done a lot more. I don't know why it only says that, but also we do a lot more horse trials than FEI events because it saves money.
Yeah.
But I was thinking about it after that, and I was like, there's a lot of horses because it wasn't on one horse. It's like on a ton of horses. But I don't feel like I don't feel like I've had the unicorn yet, like I see people riding horses and they go out and buy horses and they're like riding horses where I watch them around. I'm like, oh my God, unbelievable. But at the same time, I've learned so much from some of the absolute diamonds in the rough that we've had come through and have done so much for me. So when I was younger, my first young rider horse was that. He was so sound that I was able to go and make so many mistakes on him because I was a moron, and he won a bunch of events. So I thought I was like some sort of genius, but I knew nothing. And he ended up suffering for it. He got an injury. And I remember when that happened, because I just didn't know. I mean, I really was ignorant to it. And I was like, oh my God, I need to learn about this stuff because so I'm pretty good at rehabbing horses now because I really attend to it, and pretty good at keeping them sound as well because I recognize all the pitfalls because I usually have stepped in them. So he was super. He really did give me a lot of help because he was there to practice on all the time. He'd be beneficial in anybody's barn at any point. He might not have been a big time winner, but by God, he was there to show up.
And what was his horse's name?
Winston.
Okay.
It's a long time ago. I mean, I took him to Young Riders. I took him to Young Riders when I was 16 years old, and he'd been one of the jumpers that hadn't quite worked out. I think I got him to the intermediate level in like 8 months. Like it was just, he just was willing,
Yeah.
And then in the early part, I thought I had a bunch of good horses when I first came back from England. I had 5 in the barn when I was traveling around the country, living in squalor because I didn't have any money. But I had 2 that I bought first thing when I came back from England. One was called Chit Chat, and the other one was Formal Affair. And they taught me a lot because they both ran advanced at like 7 and 8, and they were really successful. And they were not like, one was right off the track. When I went to try him, I remember jumping straw bales in the barn aisle with them to see whether he could jump because I didn't know what else to do. And he was awesome, and he went up, and both those horses got long listed for the Canadian team one as a 7-year-old and one as an 8-year-old. It was different time.
Yeah.
But they taught me a lot about training because I had time to train them, and at the same time, they taught me a lot about my role in this profession because everything looked like it was going to be great with them. And I was so excited about where I was. I was accomplishing goals. I was checking off boxes. And when I say I was broke, I was broke. I was doing everything I could to make some money and working on farms and doing fencing and everything like that. But I had 5 horses to do, and I was trying to sell some of them, and I couldn't get anything sold. And basically someone walked in the barn and offered me money for the one I liked the most, which was Chit Chat. And it was a real gut punch, but I'd spent the year starving, literally like eating once a day and trying to get by, waiting for this thing to change where all of a sudden I wasn't desperate anymore. And I couldn't turn it down. So I sold him. So then I ended up having to sell the other horse too, because the one thing is you sell one, money goes into the business, and then it disappears, and you gotta keep going.
Yeah.
So I did a lot of that for a really long time. And then I had a really nice horse come in the barn that we bought. I had an owner. I finally had a good owner up in Canada named Elaine Davies, and they were really instrumental for me to get into a different stage of my riding career. Mostly because she sort of made me realize that, people don't, like, I was still working with this idea that if I had an owner, that we were working on how do I make the owner money, which I'd done for a long time. And she sort of made me realize that some people just want to support the sport and they love the horses and they want to just help you along. And I'll be honest with you, I was with her for 9 years, and it probably didn't occur to me until the last year that this person actually just wanted to help me. And it was hard because I didn't see that. I constantly was like, well, so what do they want out of this? Why are they doing this? So I was constantly selling horses again and that type of stuff. And we had one come in. We bought a really nice thoroughbred that he was a pretty bad show jumper, but I'm arrogant. I thought I could fix it. And then he was, but he was a beautiful mover. Like this horse, people say the thoroughbreds don't have a trot. I'm telling you this, he just had an incredible front end and back end. He was really a beautiful horse and real sharp and sensitive, which I like. And we got him and I started to compete him. And I mean, I think I was in the bottom 6 at every event after dressage all spring that year. It wasn't embarrassing because he was a really nice horse, but I knew I was trying to figure him out. But like some owners would have been like, what the hell? We just bought this. What's wrong with you? And it wasn't like he was terrible before, but he wasn't brilliant. He's up against like some serious competitors. And about 2 weeks before Kentucky, I'd ridden at Kentucky, like at the Rolex, probably 13, 14 times by that point.
Wow.
And that horse, again, though, I was just riding horses. 2 weeks before Kentucky went, he did a really good ride. I had a really good run at him at North Georgia, but I didn't get the dressage yet. And then the week after, it just came together. I figured out what was missing, basically. And I remember talking to a friend of mine as I was driving to Kentucky, and I was like, I'm coming. I'm going to win this. And he was like, maybe just settle down a little bit there, champ, because I mean, and I was like, no. And he's like, well, all you got to do is qualify for the Pan Ams. That's the goal. And I was like, no, I'm going to win this. I'm going to try to win this because I have a real opportunity here on this horse. And damned if he didn't end up second there that year. He led dressage, or was second after dressage, led after cross country. The show jumping, he had the last rail down. He had a couple rails, but he had the last one rail down and lost first because of that. But he wasn't good. He wasn't a good show jumper, and he did a good job through the whole weekend. So that horse kind of opened my eyes up to. I remember saying to my father after cross country, because my dad had been there all through this stuff. I remember saying to him, I was like, wow, so that's why everybody has so much fun with this, because it's actually supposed to be easy, because the horse just wanted to do it. It wasn't like I was having to wrestle an alligator around the course. And so he kind of opened me up to this idea of, quality is a lot easier to deal with. Not that I was able to then immediately choose that type of scenario, but and then we had a mare that my father and I bred that was a nice little horse, but she was like 15.3. She didn't look like a lot when she was younger. I'd ridden her father intermediate. And so we had this homebred, and we thought, honestly, once she was sort of 3 or 4, I was like, well, the writing's on the wall. This is not going to be good enough. So we got her out, and I started competing her a little bit. And Jen, my wife, we were married at that point. I think she was probably 5 or 6, the horse, not Jen. And I rode her training, and then the owner of the farm actually bought her off of my father and I. And I was like, look, she was like, she was small. I was like, she's certainly going to suit Jen more. And Jen took her and did the 5-star in Kentucky on her twice. But we had her for sale for a while as a training level horse, and nobody, like, people would look at her. One person sat on her. Everybody's like, oh, she's not good enough. She's not going to have the scope. She's not going to have the size. She's not going to, all they could tell me is how she wasn't going to. And so Jen ran her prelim, and I was like, I think there's more to this than what people are seeing. And it kind of got a little bit up my nose as well. And Jen got on with her really well. And they went on, and they had an unbelievable career because, the mare got the opportunity and the training, and and a rider who was sympathetic to what she needed. And that showed me a lot of of what I used to think about stuff, but you never, unless you get to keep them and finish them off and go all the way up the levels, you don't really know if you're accurate or not. So it was a really eye-opening experience for me. Jen did the 5-star well before I did, because the opportunity was there, and Jen was a partner with that horse. I mean, and when it didn't go well, it wasn't like Jen was like, "Oh, that bloody horse." She just took it as, I need to do this better, and took the responsibility.
Right.
Because of that, the horse really we got pictures of her around here jumping huge fences there, and she was like a sausage, so it was like, it was pretty cool. And then we bred her and have foals by her that have done pretty well, some better than others. But like, seeing a horse through a lifetime is a lot different than seeing a horse for a year and a half. And I'd seen a lot of year-and-a-half horses, and not
Right.
a lot of lifetime horses. And I think on that note, that horse was very instrumental in changing some things for me too. There's a bunch of horses there that in that whole time period that were showing up and going to the top level with me and stuff. But again, they weren't top horses, and they were never staying. I never kept anything after older than 10 years old, because I couldn't afford to. They were all had to be sold. Well, the best years on a horse are really 10 to 15. So you can just imagine you're doing all the work, and then and everybody knew it. They would see me on a horse. If they liked it, they'd be like, "Oh, what does that have to be to sell it?" And it's a bit depressing, but we ended up on a farm because of it. We ended up having careers because of it. So trading your hopes and dreams for someone else's money became sort of the norm. And then through that, like, I think I counted up, I've done 29 advanced horses. I've probably done 75 intermediate horses, and there has to be probably 250 to 300 prelim horses have come through my barn. Like, it's just, the numbers were huge all through my riding. But Madison Park, who I went to the Pan Ams, I'd already been to one Pan Am, so I went to the Pan Ams, and he got a silver medal there on the team, and then he went to the Olympics, and then he got a silver medal at the Worlds in Kentucky. Obviously, that horse, he changed my life in a lot of ways. He's still here. Jen rides him. He's 24 years old. He'll probably come out and compete this fall. He doesn't like the heat, so we don't make him do anything too strenuous in the summer. But he just showed me how a good horse, and it's funny, he never got what I was hoping he would get, as far as, like, I think he could have potentially been an individual medal horse. He had been to the racetrack, and in the big environment, he just had no security or confidence, and he'd lose himself in the dressage, usually at the walk, because of course when he was active he was good, but at the walk he just created, those like demons would come out. But with that, he was still terribly successful. And Jen's the reason he came into the barn. I tried him. I didn't like him at all. And I remember the conversation. I was like, "Are you kidding me? This isn't what we want." And we had an owner that wanted to buy a horse, and the owner was a bit of he was a bit difficult. And I was like, "I don't need, this is kind of pointless." But there was another horse I really liked that wouldn't pass a vetting, and Jen was like, I think he's got something. I'm like, there's so many reasons I do think this is a terrible idea. He jumped left every time he left the ground. He was hollow. He'd jump upside down when he jumped. He had lots of power. He had a great canter. He couldn't get above a 50% in dressage with the rider that had him. Like, he was a nightmare because he's just like a kid in a car seat. He's like full of himself, which is also what made him great. But I mean, she couldn't have been more right. I had a lot of time to work with him, which made a huge difference on him and on me, because it allowed me to, I mean, basically training him was like training 5 horses. So, someone tried to buy him as a 10-year-old, and it's the first horse I've ever turned down a sale on. And it was because it was as a 8-year-old. And I was like, I think now, and I love riding them, and I love horses, and I love my horses. And that's the problem, is knowing that you have to, it's like having, pick your dog, find your favorite dog and be like, I love my dog. I love my dog. And now you have to sell it to survive. I
Yeah.
mean, that's what it feels
Yeah.
like to me.
I know. It's so hard to let them go.
Yeah. And so, it's not realistic for us to be able to just sort of hang on to them. But when I turned the offer down on him, and it was life-changing money, I was like, my goals are about to be met. Like, I really think that's going to happen. Of course, at the time, like, you're an idiot. This isn't how it goes. You turn down the money and things go wrong. And of course, he went on. He did like 9 5-stars. He was, made 3 teams, medaled at 2 of them. He competed at the advanced level for 11 years until he was like 18, and he'd still have done it until he was 20. But I'd gotten where I was so worried about him getting hurt. I mean,
Yeah.
it was just impossible for me to see carrying on. So I handed him over to Jen to compete I think she's done prelim on him, training on him, because she loves him. He's a family horse. Everybody in the farm loves him. And it was just such a great, it was like a reward for him to just kind of keep going, being able to do something and be, like, I promise you, in all the years that we got him as a 7-year-old, he's still, if you show up at an event, there wasn't a single day in his whole career that cross country day he didn't show up and go, yeah, this is a great idea. And there's no possibility that in all those runs that he's done that there were days he didn't kind of feel a little under the weather or whatever. And it didn't matter, because that's what a truly great horse does. Is you go to that ring, you go to that jump, you go out on cross country and things aren't good. They throw a shoe, they're stuck in the mud, they're up on hard ground, whatever. And they go, let's do this. This is awesome. Like, your job on him is to tell him, no, let's chill out, because he's that into it. So the time to be able to train a horse makes such a difference, and it's such a privilege. And unfortunately, that's something that I don't get a lot of. And I struggle with it, because it's actually the thing that often it makes me want to, the thing that would make me want to step away from this job and lifestyle is a couple of things. Is people that won't do what they say, the stress of the trying to get the finances, and then not actually getting to finish the job on a horse. Like, when I lose rides on horses, I've had good horses that other people ended up with that I wasn't on my decision, or, even if it was on my decision, it's heart-wrenching. And it gets to be a bit like, it'd be nice to think that wasn't how it was. But at the same time, I've had so many horses that have just filled my heart. My Ready or Not mare that I ride right now, I mean, my God, she's unbelievable, and she's such a sweetheart, and she's so easygoing, and her backstory is pretty phenomenal. With her breeder loved her, chose that one as the one to go on up the levels. Died in a car crash at an event that I was at with her.
Oh my
and
gosh.
We've kept her going in her memory, with a few supporters. But even that, like, and just having her around is just, it's unbelievable. And then the group of horses that are in the barn right now, it's like, I go to ride those ones that I know are mine, and that's how it feels. It's like, it's mine. It's not like possession. It's like mine. Like, that is my wife. This is my horse.
Yeah.
This is my relationship.
Yep.
It's the thing that keeps me in this, because when that ends, there's nothing to it,
Yeah, I totally understand. And moving forward a little bit, I'd like to get into your training. So I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about your training philosophy.
Do the right thing by the horse. No ribbon is worth, well, maybe there is a ribbon worth it, but I haven't found one yet. No ribbon is worth your horse. There's just not. The end of the day, the things that keep me up at night are several, but if a horse is compromised, and it was, it happens. We're in competition. We're in horses. Horses get hurt. They're all going to die before we do, that sort of thing. They're going to go lame. But if you fill your knowledge and know enough to avoid those things, then you have to commit yourself to it. And I think knowledge is the key to all of it. And it's not utilized enough in our sport. I think people are so fascinated by the ribbon that they think that that means something. Well, I mean, I got lots of ribbons that don't do much for me, but I'll tell you what, that horse, when I go out there and I get on it to ride it at home or at a show, and it gives me its heart, I mean, it's just so worth it then. I mean, it sounds a bit stupid, I know, but, and that would be a downside of, I'll say that's probably a little bit of downside of me in competition, is it takes something pretty important to make for me to kind of be like, all right, all cards on the table, we're going, there's no tomorrow. I tend to ride as though I'm going to have, that I need to make sure I can ilk 5 more years out of it. So, and that's for me, training in horses, and then training people. People come in to ride with us, ride with Jen and myself, because they want the successes of other students that we've coached, because we've had medalists, all 3 young riders at every level, and for years, like multiples. And then I've got students that have ended up on teams and gone to Pan Ams, and I've coached just a ton of kids that won ACs and championships and things like that. And they come in with that, thinking that's what they're coming in for. And for me, they're not. They're coming in so that I can teach them how to circumvent problems, how to work with the horse in a better way, that sort of thing. Like, trying to change them and impact their life so that they do the right things by the horse, by their parents, by themselves, all that stuff. And it gets tiresome at some point. I mean, that will drag it right out of you, but it is so much about the knowledge that you have to go and you have to really work on putting that as the biggest priority. Like we started an app last year with a couple of former students of ours, called Ride IQ. And it is all about, it's got, it's coaching over audio, it's riding, it's information, because we have multiple things on there. And that was when we started. I'm like, I want people to understand about what a foot should look like. I want people to understand this stuff that matters to your end goal, because if you don't know these things, your potential Olympic horse is going to sit on the sidelines. So we want, or not even potential Olympic horse, but just your partner. If your partner gets hurt because you didn't know the bungee cord cross ties, when they pull back, will sometimes snap and take their eye out. Like, if you see that, that's knowledge you've got to share. So all that stuff we're trying to put out there, and not just us, but like we've got like 30 coaches on there, I think, again, because I want the knowledge to go there. And it does make it one step easier, because I don't have to then deal with the, personality that might be contrary to what I want to deal with,
And to continue on this topic of teaching, when you are teaching students, actually, and when you're riding and training yourself too, is there any type of favorite exercise or type of work that you have in your repertoire that you find is really important?
There's a bunch. So it's funny, because this is a little bit like when I go to clinics and stuff, we'll go do the cross country stuff, and I'm like, oh, that horse, I could use this exercise for. Like, because I've done so many horses, and most of them wouldn't have been chosen horses. They came in with a problem. I had to find some way around it. So there's, like, everybody has, say, one way to introduce a horse to water or a ditch or whatever. And I'm sure they're good. And if you've trained 10 horses, you probably have 10 things, but you're probably relying on 1 or 2 of the same thing. And we don't have that here. So, but what we do have here is a ton of jumps in, like, a ton of different terrain and things to help train them. And one of the best ones for us is I've got a mound that's down by some cross country jumps I have. It's beside my steps, and I put a vertical on it. And I mean, it's the distance across the top and it's the ramp on either side make all the difference. But you can teach a horse to put a powerful 6-foot stride in with this exercise, without having rails that are, inhibiting the horse's natural ability to do it.
Right.
And they will jump big fences off a 6-foot stride, and they'll choose to do it. And the riders can just sit with a balance. It's one of the ones that I go to with a lot of horses because it is way more effective than doing canter rails or 9-foot rails and all that stuff. And that would be one other thing I think in the jumping. I see a lot of, people love the 9-foot rail, and I actually am not a big 9-foot rail fan, because to me, the problem is not how deep you get the horse to the fence, which the 9-foot rail puts them on a placement, but what is the last stride like? So if I put the rail out at 18 feet, 19 feet, I can get them to go over rail and coil to jump over the fence, because it'll teach them how to canter better to get that deeper distance. Whereas at the 9-foot rail, you see people come in and the horse kind of takes a lunge at the 9-foot rail. Well, yeah, okay, so the horse is closer, but his canter's crap now, and that's not what you're trying to teach them. So I tend to go about things a little differently sometimes. The same within the warm-up for show jumping. I'll do a lot of horses where I'll roll the ground rail way out rather than underneath it. Like I see people roll it underneath, and they'll be like, well, I want them to get deep so that they can bump the rail. And the problem is the horses don't necessarily, again, get that deep. What they do is they just get flatter. But if I roll the rail out, I can get them as deep, but what it does, it brings them off the ground better, and you get a much rounder, better shape. So I'm usually out there rolling the rail out. Everybody else is rolling the rail in, but partly that happens because a lot of them are riding careful horses, and they want the horse to bump the rail so that when it goes in the ring, it's already kind of sharp. But I don't end up with a lot of, like, I've got a couple real good ones right now that are really careful, but I don't need to bump them because they're careful already. But if I'm riding one that's not that careful, I don't want it to bump into the rail because they don't necessarily improve with it. What I want them to do is get a better shape. And that's my whole thing, is I'm always trying to get a better shape on them, trying to get them to be, let's say, more correct. And I'm not, if I was better at my job, I would be doing that and winning huge classes and everything. But I'm good at my job, and I'm very good at dealing with deficits.
Actually, speaking of deficits, it kind of goes into my next question. When you are training students, do you ever find that there's a certain thing that a lot of your students struggle with, like a deficit maybe, that you like to work on a lot?
Yes. They need to have better senses of humor. No, I think everybody comes with their own thing, and it's stages. I think the young riders tend to be really aggressive, a little bit irresponsible, and a bit oblivious. And because of that, their parents are like, oh my God, they're so brave. But not knowing what's going on is not bravery. Not knowing what's going on is naive. And once you start to know what's going on, then it's bravery. So with those, there's sort of three different types, and usually the young riders are a little bit that way. There are the older riders are that way too, but the younger riders tend to be a bit that way. And so your job is to teach them technique, teach them to ride better, teach them to be more patient, and then from that, watch that you don't degrade their bravery. So what will often happen is you'll start teaching them those techniques and things, and then the next thing you know is they're overly burdened with what you've taught them, and all they can think of is the stuff in front of them, and they start to lose their flow, which they had before, and is something that you want to nurture. So then you end up having the opposite, where you teach them to wait to add, and all of a sudden all they do is add, and then you're like, okay, well now we got to work on the opposite end of it. Finding the middle is difficult for most everybody. Some of the exceptional kids I've taught, they don't have trouble finding the middle, but the exceptional ones are maybe 10%, and I'll tell you what, if they're the 10%, it doesn't pretty much matter who they work with, as long as the person they're working with gives them good information as how to train a horse, they're going to succeed. They don't need to learn the process that well, because they're almost installed with it.
Yeah.
And then the one big thing that I see all the time that I always am working on, and rarely am I shocked with someone actually by someone doing it, it's usually the opposite, is people cutting in, like being impatient to get to the jump off a turn instead of, so when you jump one fence, and we were just working on it earlier with a group of kids that are riding with me, and they're good riders. Like I promise you, they're really good riders. But they jump in, and so there's a vertical turning left to an oxer, and then on the other end, there's a vertical turning right to the same oxer, so that you work both sides. And they will jump in, and everybody gets impatient and cuts in on the line, and then you lose the canter, you lose the distance and all of that. So teaching people to be patient is the first thing I find that you have to do to actually make them competent. And that's not like, and that's in the turns usually. Then teaching them to be patient when they're competing and things are getting, everybody's adrenaline's going, and all of a sudden what makes a great rider, what makes a great round, when you watch the top riders ride, all those different horses go about the same. They're pretty relaxed with their job. They stay out on a line, they go in on a line, they make decisions based upon information that they're processing. And if you just
what they have in that moment.
Yeah, and if you just jump and cut in, then you're gonna struggle with this. I mean, you're gonna struggle with it because every course designer is gonna own you, and every course has those questions on it, both in show jumping and on cross country. And here's what really frustrates me with that is, like, I've got people that I can get them to do it at home, and I go to a show. I had one this spring do it, and I'm like, they just cut in like way early, like 10 feet early. And I'm like, how can you possibly get out of that situation? And she wasn't able to, but it just like, it's the thing we've worked on for 3 years. That's a mental game you need to own. I cannot fix that for you. But the interesting thing to me with it is those same people rarely do it in dressage, because they know in dressage they're going to lose a mark if they do it. Like if they cut the circle or, try to get back to the wall too quickly. There comes a point where they start to get there and start to understand that that if they cut in, they're going to lose that mark. As soon as they're in that situation, they reform themselves because they don't want to lose that mark. But they're losing far more than a mark when they do it in the ring to jumps or cross country to jumps. And it is amazing because you see it all the time. And again, when those people are going out, as someone develops, the older riders that are experienced in the right way, or some of the younger riders as well, they'll be able to hold that together,
Yeah. And then I have a question for you about competitions too, because I'd like to get a sense of what it's like when you are out there competing yourself. So we talked about adrenaline a little bit, especially with your students. So, but everyone deals with adrenaline when they're at shows, and some people get nervous, some people in a good way, some people in a bad way. So when you are competing, do you get nervous? And if you do, how do you handle your nerves?
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's very much horse specific. Probably as I've gotten older, it might be a little more, I'm far more aware. And so I will, when I'm laying there the night before, I'm, twitchy. Usually the night before a competition, I sleep pretty well because I start to go over the course in my mind and visualize it. I'm a big visualizer when it's going well. And I'll fall asleep by fence 10. Like I rarely get past fence 10, but that doesn't mean I'll still wake up in the morning and be like, and I get, you get that horrible and that great, like all of a sudden you're like, you think about it and all of a sudden the adrenaline shoots through your system. And, but as far as nerves, like it depends on what's riding on it. I find I'm far more comfortable at a big competition with a horse that I produced to do that stuff with, because I feel like I'm going out to show the ownership that I have in our relationship.
Right.
But if I catch ride horse, I don't catch ride much anymore. I used to catch ride a ton. And the reason I stopped is it's like, if I'm talking to you right now in English and you switch to Spanish, I don't speak Spanish, we're in trouble. And that's
Yeah.
exactly what I feel like now when I'm catch riding horses, is that the two of us are on different wavelengths because the conversation's different. So then I get nervous. I still have to do it sometimes and ride people's horses. But depends on my relationship and what the horse is. I always felt very confident with Madison Park when I would ride him cross country, because he was a partner who wanted to do it. And by the time I got him up the levels, he was really, really broke. You could do anything with him. That's, for me, that's the trick, is I need to be able to enact change on them and do anything with them. If I can do that, my nerves are very, very low. And then at the bigger events for me, I'm usually there with fewer people, fewer horses, and I actually get to focus. And oh my God, it's such a privilege, because running around these events that we go to where we've got 23 students. Now, Jen does a lot of the work at the shows that way, and I end up riding. But like when you're doing 6 to, I don't do them anymore. I probably 7's the most I'll do now. But when I was doing 9, even 7, you're just getting on one horse, on the other horse, and it makes me a little bit like, it's not, I don't know if it's nerves, but it ruins the experience for sure.
Right. You don't get to take everything in the way you would with less.
But like Madison Park and dressage, I mean, at the World Championships, he was so good on the flat, like in his warm-ups and everything. Like he looked like he could do dressage, and he can really do dressage, but he couldn't do it in a big arena. That day of waiting till I was the last rider, so I was the anchor rider, and I went right after Michael Young. I mean, I was as nauseous for that as I've ever been for any cross country round. I mean, it was horrible. The next day for cross country, I was like, all good. Not because I think everything's gonna work out, but because at least I have ownership in that one. I know the two of us are on the same page,
Yeah.
So I think it's very horse specific, and then it's very like I'm taking one to the 3-star at Maryland this year, and he's not.
I was just going to ask you about that. Okay.
Yeah, he's not quite all the way there yet. Like, it's coming. Like, he's done really well. He's a very good horse. But as in our relationship, we're not all the way there yet. But I am telling you, I am so excited about riding that horse there. It like gives me shivers, because I'm just like, it's that budding relationship where you're like, this could be great, and I cannot wait until next year with them. And that, I mean, it'll be nerves, but it'll be different nerves. You're worried about the rail and show jumping, but with this horse, I feel like that's going to be an anomaly, not a norm.
Right. It'll be fun. It's fun. It's good nerves. Good nerves.
Good nerves. Exactly.
Yeah.
I will say probably show jumping is the worst for me, because I mean, you have a rail and you're just like, I mean, it's gut wrenching, and then the other thing is, and this it's probably, there are people that are just gifted in there. I have to work at everything a little bit more. I'm not natural with a lot of the stuff we do. I'm very natural in my relationship with horses, is very easy for me. So I have a major advantage there. But as far as like having the position, I have to ride and work all the time, because I don't hold it. I've got friends that get on a horse. I can get on any horse, but if I'm not riding, I can't get on any horse and do well. I need to be like fit in the right way, just the way it is. My wife sits on a horse, she's always balanced. I'm like Humpty Dumpty.
Yeah, and I was just going to ask you about that. I will be at the Maryland. I assume you mean Maryland 5-star.
Yeah, no, I'm not doing the 5-star. I'm doing the 3.
Okay, and what's that horse's name? I'll have to look out for you guys.
Oh my God, G-Star von Klinkenberg. It's like, I think there's even more to it than that. He's got the worst name in the world. Name's Gus, but he is like, he's really sweet. He's a really nice horse. He fits me, and I've got good horses in that barn, but like, he's like a glove. Like, I feel part of him, and I've had him for just about a year. He was a student of mine's horse, and he was just failing, and Like I've never been afraid to get on one that I thought was good enough that just wasn't going right. I'm always like, I kind of always a little bit arrogantly believe I can get there, but
Right.
it's really happening. Like
Mm-hmm.
it's really exciting. If I could
It's a
ride,
great feeling.
yeah. I mean, if my parents just had been wealthier, I mean, that's what I blame everything on. Yeah, I'd have 5 horses like this in the barn, and then I'd think I was brilliant. But fortunately for me, I'll have a few in the barn that aren't so good, and that'll keep me well grounded.
Mhm. Well, I'll have to come say hi at the Maryland 5-Star. I can meet you in person then.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I'll be up there doing that, and then I'm doing a course walk for Ride IQ and Eventing Nation. I'm
Oh,
going to
awesome.
walk in the 5-Star there because I do one at Kentucky every year for
Hmm.
Purina.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've been with Purina for God, I don't know, like over 20, I think about 25 years.
Wow. Yeah.
And sponsored by them for probably 18. And now it's actually funny because now I do a lot of broadcasting for them and stuff, and I really enjoy it. It's just this natural progression. And I do interviews and things like that. So just, like I'm a huge fan of the sport, but
Hmm.
honestly, I'm a huge fan of the horse.
Yeah.
I would be happy train if someone said, you know what, Kyle, I want you to ride my 5 horses or 8 horses or whatever, and you're going to ride them. I'm going to compete them. This is your job, and then you can help me out or whatever. I would jump on that job and be happy as hell. Take away all the
Yeah.
responsibility of trying to take care of, manage everything as a professional.
Hmm.
Let me ride some horses. I'm in.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, that's all I have for you, but I really appreciate you again getting on and chatting with me, and I guess I'll see you in about a month from now.
Thanks for listening to this week's episode with Kyle Carter, and a big thank you to the sponsor of this week's episode, Purina. Learn more at purinamills.com. You can subscribe to the Practical Horseman podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you listen. While you're there, please rate and review the show. Also, tune into our mini-sode series, The FOD Pod, which is released every other Sunday. You'll hear audio lessons from our favorite Practical Horseman On Demand clips. At Practical Horseman On Demand, you can enjoy hundreds of how-to videos and get insider access to exclusive interviews and lectures, slow motion demonstrations, and step-by-step tutorials taught by top-level pros in the hunter, jumper, equitation, and eventing disciplines. When you tune into the FOD Pod, listen closely for a promo code for 15% off your Practical Horseman On Demand subscription. Thanks again for listening to this week's episode. I'm Julia Murphy, and you've been listening to the Practical Horseman Podcast.
Yeah, awesome. We'll see you up there.
Well, thanks so much, Kyle.
Thank you.